record for the webinar, and I can now pass you over to Jason, who will introduce himself and obviously then present. So Jason, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Roisin, as well. Sorry, I'm just going to put the screen up here. No, it's getting the right one. There we go. No. Okay. Slideshow from beginning.
Yeah, that's working, Jason.
Okay. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for asking me to speak. I recognise some of the folks on the screen. So hello to Sean and Helen and Julie. So again, it's great to be here and you know, to share something of our experience in Fermanagh, and particularly through Fermanagh Community Transport. But I think very much making it clear from the beginning that what I'm about to present is through my eyes. I speak very much from my experience, my perspective, and in terms of particularly the experience in relation to COVID within Fermanagh. And so again, yes, I'm Jason Donaghy, manager of Fermanagh Community Transport this last 4 years. Rural community development, I guess, has been a passion of mine for many, many years. It's something that's very important to me, and I think there were some very real lessons, some fantastic work, some new ways of doing things. But there are also many lessons for us, I think, on the journey that we all went through over the last while. And so what I'd like to do, if I can, over just the next period is maybe try and tell a story as much as anything else, and with maybe some of the learnings that come out of that. And again, I'd be very happy to take any questions, and I'll try and answer if I can, and if I can't, I'll tell you I can't. All right. So again, I know that in terms of the case study, it is about community resilience and how we build community resilience. And again, for some of the folks that are on here, I know we've shared very similar journeys. And again, I suppose I was initially thinking, well, what is it that I've got to say that could in any way be of any value or use when you look at some of the other case studies? But again, I think one of the things is we know that the role of the community and voluntary sector at a local level was hugely important. So, you know, I think I would start it from that context. So if I could just move on here, this disclaimer, I shared this on my board, the views are mine, they're entirely mine, and they're not to be attributed to Fermanagh Community Transport. I was the person that was in here operationally managing day to day, dealing with the to's and the fro's, and the board. Obviously, we're checking in every month, more frequently during COVID. But I would just like to be clear that they are my views. So a wee bit about Fermanagh. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Fermanagh. If you haven't, I strongly suggest that you come here. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful county. And as you can see on the right, we're a very, very rural. We have the lowest population density in Northern Ireland. In fact, we have the lowest population density outside of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And we have a magnificent Loch Earn, which cuts the county in two, as you can see on the left-hand side. You can see those little blue bits within the red bit. So it makes it quite a challenging area, and everything, all traffic has to come through Enniskillen, the market town, which is located just about here. So we have a population in excess of 60,000, but a very, very highly rural aging population. In fact, our aging population is the fastest aging population in Northern Ireland. And beautiful place to be. And one of the things that has happened over the years, maybe just by way of setting some example, if we're talking about COVID, many people have moved to the county for its beauty, particularly from England, interestingly, and Europe, because they see this as the place to relax, the green, the water, the recreation, the health benefits, the isolation, the beauty. All of that is fantastic. But what we soon come to discover was that when COVID hit, it becomes something entirely different. And we'll speak to that as we go through. So I suppose quite often we feel as if we are on the periphery of the periphery. We are in the far southwest of the north, or Northern Ireland, whatever you want to call it. And again, that is County Fermanagh, and we're bordered by counties Monaghan, Cavan, Leitrim, and Donegal. So we have a longer border with the Republic of Ireland than we do with any of the other counties in Northern Ireland. So if I can just move to the next one. It was just a wee bit about ourselves. I'm sure you're all familiar with community transport, what it is and what it isn't. And but who are we, as opposed to set us in context, to give you a flavour of who we are and how, the role that we played and how that played out. We're a registered charitable company. We were established in 2011. Again, our job is essentially to provide a service for those, particularly the vulnerable groups in our rural community, who don't have access to a car or public transport. And again, in Fermanagh, public transport, given the demand configuration on the ground, it just doesn't exist by and large in our very rural areas. And I noticed that within the National Centre report, they talk about hyper rural. Well, if we're talking hyper rural, Fermanagh is about as hyper rural as you're going to get. And accessibility, or what I prefer to call transport poverty, is a serious and real issue. And again, we can imagine how that plays out then when you need to intervene and or support people or help people during a disaster or an emergency of some description. Although the corollary to that is that car ownership is the highest in the north in Fermanagh, which is kind of strange when you think, well, it can't be that bad if all these folks have all these cars. Well, actually, they have all those cars not because they're luxuries, it's because they're necessities. And quite often food, heating, or whatever else is going to the wall. We're a member-only organisation. We have 15 staff. We have 9 volunteer social car drivers now. We had 30 pre-COVID. And that was one of the big things that we suffered as a result of COVID, in that we lost 21 volunteers because the majority of our volunteers were within the high-risk shielding category. So they obviously, we certainly were not going to put them at risk. And many of them also decided, look, we wouldn't be prepared to sit in a vehicle at such close proximity with this thing called COVID. So that brought our social car aspect to an end for a considerable period of time. We have a voluntary board of directors, which, and I have to say, we're blessed in the sense that, particularly in relation to this situation of COVID, we have representatives from, we have one representative who sits from the local social services, particularly who is responsible for carers, supporting carers within the Western Trust, Western Health and Social Care Trust, and then the Southwest Age Partnership. And again, the disability, we have a really strong advocate for disability, as well as representation from a local business, a couple of local businesses on board. So we have a small board, but a very, very good, tight board with their ears very tight to the ground, very, very close to the ground. How we operate is we have a fleet. We have a fleet of 12 16-seater vehicles, and then we complement that with volunteer social car schemes, which are important. So for a lot of our work, we're demand responsive. We don't run scheduled bus services. We try and lump people together, if you like, in groups on any given day to get them from the rural areas into Enniskillen town to essential services, be that the GP, the hospital, to partake in activities, to get financial advice, to meet with their employment advisor, whatever that may be. But where we have particularly time critical and time sensitive appointments, we tend to use the volunteer social cars for that. So for instance, last week we had a lady who had a hospital appointment for her child in the local hospital. And we know that those appointments are like hen's teeth. They're really important. If you miss them, you may not get another one for 9 months, 12 months. So in that situation where that person needs to be there on time, we very much try and use the social car scheme. We depend on a fantastic group of social volunteers. And maybe just to put that into context, the volunteers pre-COVID, 2019, 2020, drove around the world the equivalent of 3.5 times. So that's putting into context their contribution to meeting transport poverty or accessibility needs in Fermanagh, and it speaks to the real challenge that we have. Ordinarily, our funding comes from the Department of Infrastructure in the Northern Ireland Executive, and they give us our core funding. And then we get some money from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and that is to support smart passes, the assisted rural travel scheme. And that's really, really important because, again, community transport exists because of market failure in rural areas. If someone in Fermanagh wants to get a taxi from 26 miles away into Enniskillen town, that can cost anywhere up to £40 one way. And with the price of fuel and everything else at the present time, it's incredibly prohibitive. And we have a lot of people who are effectively housebound and in prison. So the remainder of our money, generally we operate around about £480,000, £500,000 per year. The other portion of our money comes from fares for those that don't qualify for passes, so those that aren't elderly or aren't disabled. And we also have some group hire for voluntary and charitable organisations who can self-hire our vehicles. And we provide training. So that gives you a bit of a sense of who we are and what we do. So we're really here to help the most vulnerable within our rural area, and we are a deeply, deeply rural area within some very challenging geography, which doesn't make it easy to deliver transport services. And in fact, within a Northern Ireland context, we're probably one of the more expensive because we have longer journeys and more challenging terrain. So if I move on here, I'm going to repeat a lot of what we said. Pre-COVID, we had about 900 members. We were doing 30,000 individual trips per annum. We also do a disability action transport scheme in Enniskillen, which is specifically for disabled folks. But the people that we predominantly deal with are the disabled and the elderly. And all our vehicles are fully accessible, lifts, low steps and whatever else. We have paid team and we have volunteers. So that was pre-COVID, which was great. We were on target to hit our highest number of annual member trips, individual member trips. And then COVID landed on February 2020, and it was as if, I suppose, a meteorite had hit the world. And forgive me for the image that I present, and Helen, I know who's on here too. This was an image that was very prominent in the local papers, in the press, and on the regional media. One week we were watching everything that was happening in China, and then the next week we had a death in Fermanagh from this thing called COVID, which nobody knew about. And at this time, I remember driving into work early in March, April, and seeing mobile mortuary morgues being brought to the local hospital, and graves were being opened up in anticipation of what was going to happen. It was a very scary time, and this poor lady that was buried, her husband couldn't attend the funeral, and it really brought it home to people. Hold on, this thing has traveled from China to Fermanagh in a matter of weeks, and I think people were finding it very hard to comprehend that. So all of a sudden we were thrown into this unknown, massively unknown situation. And it really did appear that everything for us was brought to a standstill. All our members were advised, look, lock down, you need to shield, you're vulnerable. All the folks that we were bringing, by and large, those 30,000 trips, all of those people were confined to their home for their own health, for their own well-being, for their own safety and protection. And the demand for our conventional service pretty much stopped overnight. And again, understandably, the vast majority of our people didn't want to travel. Their carers, their loved ones didn't want them to travel. And particularly on a small minibus, it's such close proximity, given a highly contagious, virulent virus, which we still knew very little about. So the fear was real and growing, and the media coverage was obviously, it was 24/7. It was loud. It was very loud. And I think if anything, one of the things in a rural area is that if anything happens in a rural area, it tends perhaps to be more pronounced. We know that anonymity and confidentiality is much less in a rural area, a dispersed rural area, than it is in an urban and built area. So people tend to know people who have been impacted. So we were trying to make sense of what this meant for us and for our members and for the wider area. And in all honesty, in that moment, and probably it's maybe a bit unfair, there were no answers coming forward. What were we supposed to do? How were we supposed to react to this particular situation? Because people's lives didn't stop. They were changing radically. But what were we to do? How were we to do it? When were we to do it? Who were we to do it with? How is this going to be paid for? Whatever else. How are we going to protect our staff? You know, what did this mean for our staff? Could we keep our staff on, our volunteers, everything? So there was a whole lot of stuff going on and going through our heads and our minds. And personally, I was getting very frustrated. We knew that something needed to be done. And we talked about this internally as an organisation. And the obvious thing for us was, obviously subject to guidance and whatever else, was could we actually just turn our service on its head? And so rather than bringing the people to the services, to the facilities, could we bring some of the facilities and the services to them? So essentially delivering. That's, in a nutshell, what we thought we could do, and perhaps play our part. Because we were being contacted, we were starting to get contact from a lot of people saying, look, we can't get access to food. We have a family member who moved to Fermanagh and they're not engaged with the wider community. They have no family or friends who can look out for them or who can bring stuff to them. And I think also at this stage, we were reasonably aware and astute to the fact that there was a real danger that if a whole lot of volunteers started kicking off and running about the country, that an uncoordinated approach could actually cause greater harm than good. And we know that there was a real push for volunteers, but without a real sense of how are these volunteers to be deployed? How are they going to be managed? Because we were dealing with vulnerable people, highly vulnerable people, and encouraging people to get involved. But in what way? How are we going to manage that, coordinate that? What was the leadership going to look like? And these were some of the things, I suppose, that were going through our heads. So that's saying something about the sudden onset of COVID-19. It was a moment in time, again, I think, which none of us will forget where we were, and just a major shock to the system. So for a period, there was a bit of a hiatus, I felt. And again, from my opinion anyway, I know we wanted to perhaps take a lead, and I know that some of the folks on the call will probably speak to this and feel free to argue with me on it. But felt a real need to bring people together, to bring organisations and agencies together within Fermanagh, but very much focusing on the people that we were serving. This wasn't about us. It wasn't about Fermanagh Community Transport. It was about those people that we had developed relationships, friendships with. We got to know their families. We know their families. We know their carers. We know their lives. We know their stories. But we could see this motion kicking off that was going potentially in all directions. People were keen to do something without perhaps having a real handle on what it was and how that would fit within a wider effort. And therefore, there was a real risk of a dissipation of energy and duplication and noise. And I'm going to talk about this thing, noise, and actually need getting lost in that. And so really, actually what happened was I actually got a call. I took a call from within a government agency, a government organisation. And as you can probably see, I don't have much problem talking, and other people, I think, would probably say the same. But I do have a background in facilitation and leadership, and working in very difficult, contentious areas and issues. I was asked, would I try and bring people together or organisations together who would have an investment, an interest and a role, something to bring to dealing with the emerging serious situation that we're facing. So, and in so doing, trying to do it in a way that would not fuel the spread of this virus, trying to manage those tensions, to do something to get stuff out to people. So we know that this virus was spread by transport and by travel. And yet we were talking about helping people and bringing stuff out to people, and at the same time trying not to spread that further. So we're very vulnerable about trying to balance that. So we chaired two very, very straightforward, simple meetings. We called some organisations together, and that was within the Fermanagh and Omagh District Council area. And in all fairness, the majority of the groups come together, and really those two meetings were about, there was a real sense of urgency, and saying, look, what do we feel we can do here? We're mindful, look, things need to be done. We still weren't sure at that stage what needed to be done, but can we at least begin to try and understand what needs to be done and who is best placed to do what? Rather than us all trying to be all things to all people, which was a real danger in all of this. And again, being mindful that all of us only had so much resource in terms of time, assets, funding, and whatever else. And I suppose really what we were keen to do was to do the best with what we had, and keep it focused on the people who were really going to need the help. And I think we were very honest in that at the beginning. And I think also what we were recognizing in those first two meetings is, look, let's not be naive and stupid enough to think that, you know, there maybe hasn't been previous competition or grievances or rubbing one another up the wrong way as organizations. You know, organizations in the real world compete for money outside of COVID, and that has influenced and will have influenced the context within which we were operating. So we're also trying to just create the space, the opportunity for conversation, open and honest conversation, at least to begin to have that conversation. And we had two of those meetings, one roughly after the other. And I do have to say, Helen, again, who's on, we were in contact with Fermanagh and Omagh District Council. I'm very grateful to Helen as well. And I was very mindful that at some stage it was likely that the council was going to take on lead responsibility for coordinating the local response. But at that time, we felt we had to get our act together to build some degree of coherence and initial communication, conversation, collaboration that would enable us to fit within that local government response, and that we were coming to it with a readiness and a preparedness that could hit the ground to a greater degree than if we just come to it cold. So that's saying something about that. So that hiatus. So I'm just going to share this very quickly. In listening to the meetings, one of the things that come out of the meetings that I facilitated was we tried to imagine, well, look, as community and voluntary groups, how could we develop something that makes sense, a roadmap? This wasn't necessarily about collaboration, it was about a process of managing people coming through for needs. So who is best placed to do what? And I'm just going to flick through this, and if anyone's interested, I can send it to you afterwards or make it available to the folks. And unfortunately, I had to break it up because otherwise it's too small. But we honestly did give some serious thought to making sense, because who were the right people to take calls around mental health and to deal with mental health? Who are the right people to deal about food? Who are the right people to deal about prescriptions? Who are the right people to deal about loneliness? You know, there was so many issues and more. And so we tried to look at what was available within the county, within the district, I beg your pardon, within Fermanagh and Omagh, and try and make some sense of that. And we tried to root out these pathways and a flow decision model or pathways, and to really give us some food for thought. So who might do what, refer. So we had developed some concept of what we could do, and we could have done that had there been nothing else happening. You know, we were pretty confident in that. But I have to say, it was great then, obviously, when the council come on and whatever else. But we were still concerned at that stage. We still weren't getting any real leadership from a regional level in terms of emergency committees response or plan. I actually forwarded that previous page to the regional authorities and to the local authorities to say, look, folks, here's our thinking, here's what we think could be done by way of actually trying to coordinate this and make sure that the right people are getting the right interventions at the right time. And I think that's a big thing that has been really important to me, and I know for an awful lot of the folks involved in the response and in terms of community resilience in Fermanagh. I'm one of those people, I'm not interested in good things. We quite often hear, and we hear it from civil servants, we hear it from others, you know, oh, it was very good, that was a good thing that you've done. No, it wasn't. It was the right thing. And the work that we were all doing was about doing the right thing in the right way at the right time with the right people with the right approach. And I think that is something that we tried to honor and tried to have underpin everything that we've done. We didn't get it all right. And this is one of the things I think today I want to say is that I think there's too much of a predisposition towards looking at so-called what was great and this notion of heroic leadership, which I think is a very grand title for people doing their jobs. Because I think the people that were heroic were the people that were going out onto the doors within the 2 meters and actually doing their jobs. My drivers, my volunteers who were out there immediately without any direction or guidance, but they were out there immediately, who are on the minimum wage, aren't getting awards and whatever else, and we're still struggling to get our money, even though we were seen to be vital and whatever else within that context. So I think there are other issues coming out of this for me. So what will we do? And it speaks to the role of the voluntary and community sector more generally. So we went from carrying our members. So on the top left, you can see one of our buses and 2 of our members, which is what we ordinarily do. We get people onto the bus in the rural areas and we get them into Enniskillen as comfortably and safely and as timely a manner as possible so that they can get into their lives, that they can experience the things that the rest of us take for granted. They can go and meet their friends, they can go to the shop, they can go to the GP, they can go to the exercise class, they can go to the mental health specialist or whatever. And then for those folks that need the social care, we have great volunteers like the wee man down here on the bottom who give their time entirely selflessly and really go that extra mile to help those individuals get into life. And that's what I see what we're about, is helping the people get into life. But all of a sudden we went to this, and this is when things really started to go. And Helen and co within the community development department within Fermanagh and Omagh District Council really did. It was fantastic. It was then that that group that we were facilitating, which the council actually in full credit participated in, and we were mindful that we would then hand over, if you like, the leadership and the facilitation. We wanted to know how best we could complement that. And one of the things that we did do, and the council come to us very early on and recognized, look, we had assets, we had particular expertise, resources and capabilities that nobody else did. We had a fleet of 16-seater vehicles that we can take the seats out of them. So they're big Sprinter vans, they can be repurposed. We could have set up clinics in the back of them and we could deliver these large boxes, each one which was 17.5 kilos in weight. So we delivered something in the region, I think, of 10 to 15,000 of those, as well as a further 5,000 to 7,000 food parcels for various other organizations and numerous other mental health, gardening, well-being packs and various other things. And we were able to do that, and we were delighted to do that. But there were lessons from that as well. Some people did need the food, but I think in reflection, what we realized is that there were people who didn't need the food. But there was also a strange lesson in the food, that it was people at a regional level outside of the area who determined what was going into the boxes. Now this, I'm kind of going offside and off-piste here, but I think this is an example of where it's really important that local people have an input into design and what goes into packs that go out locally. And one of the funny stories from this is that in each of those boxes, there was pasta sheets. And when these went out, particularly to the elderly people, they said, what are these things? What do we do with these? Whereas people in Fermanagh, and again, myself growing up, it's potatoes, carrots, cabbage, meat. People from a very middle-class background were determining what people in rural Fermanagh were eating. And a lot of the stuff was being passed off to neighbours and given to friends. They didn't know what to do with it. The intention was good, but it wasn't thought through, again, from the perspective of the person who was going to be using that food or needing to eat it and indeed cook it. So you can see here council staff and ourselves working hand in glove from the local leisure centre. There was a real sense of urgency. It wasn't just about boxes. We were actually checking in and making connections with the people who were shielding. And for many of them, we were the only contact they were having. And I can give you some examples in that when our drivers were going out and I was going out, and volunteers who signed up with us, as well as our existing volunteers who continued to deliver parcels, not passengers or members. When they were going out onto the door, drop on the door, completely compliant with the 2 meters and social distancing and hygiene, they were being confronted with people who had just received news through the post that they had been diagnosed with cancer, that they had lost a loved one. I myself went to a door where I found an individual who presented who had just cut their own wrists, that self-harmed. So in that moment, we were dealing with a lot more issues. We were being friends, we were being family, we were being counsellors, we were being mental health workers, we were being social workers. And again, there are lessons there for us. And in terms of the system, and that's something I want to come back to again, is the system. The council and ourselves and the other volunteering community work incredibly well together, but there were massive, to me, systems learnings, if not failures, that need to be looked at and need to be addressed and need to be acknowledged, particularly within the context of Northern Ireland. I think England's different, and Scotland and Wales, given the integration of the roles within council and the differences in the way the public sector organisations are set up. But we worked hand in glove, in fact, to the point where we worked at council premises, the council staff, the teams worked in here with us. We made premises available to them. We stored stuff and vice versa. We worked very fluidly through one another, and it was really fantastic to see how things could be done. But again, I have to say that come down to the leadership of the likes of Helen and again, Kim and other people, Marcella, and there are other people who I can't even remember now. But there was preparedness to make things happen, not in any way doing anything that we shouldn't be doing, but to make it happen. So, you know, this was one of the things we stuck up at our own AGM. You can see some of the stuff up in the top left. We also were bringing then the vulnerable on our vehicles to vaccination centres. And this lady in particular, whilst it wasn't a very good idea having people travelling on minibuses the way that they were travelling pre-COVID, they were actually really useful to bring folks who perhaps had mobility issues. 1 metre, we have a platform in the back that's 5-6 metres long, so we could take a vulnerable individual who had accessibility issues, get them to the clinic and get them home safely. And we had adapted the interior of the vehicles. So as well as doing the food and whatever else, we done that. We were bringing people to the clinic, and there was an interesting story behind that, in that was identified by GPs at a regional level. I had advertised that service, and I was contacted by the Health and Social Care Board, the regional board at that time for Northern Ireland, and they said, listen, this is fantastic. Is there any way that we could coordinate with community transport to roll that out regionally? And I said, I'm sure, absolutely. I'd be delighted to facilitate that with community transport across Northern Ireland. But unfortunately, the Department for Infrastructure at that time felt that it wasn't within their remit to collaborate with the Health and Social Care Board, which I think was a massive and missed opportunity, and again is a systems failure, because there was a service and a system and a resource that could have been deployed like that, with a fleet of vehicles that could have been doing what we were doing. I was getting phone calls from organisations saying, Jason, nobody's coming to us and looking for us to do whatever X, Y, and Z. And so different places were doing different things. And what we were trying to do was to share what we were doing with other areas. So for me, that was a serious fail and a serious opportunity to really do even more. We had rural housing associations coming to us to help get to their clients. Also, the gentleman in the wheelchair you'll see over here on the right, he had a family member that was getting married, and the family were worried that they wouldn't be able to get him to the wedding. And it was one of those lovely things that we could do, completely compliant again with COVID. We were able to get him to the wedding on time, and again it was magnificent. So there was some very heartwarming stories, some very sad stories. So those are just some of the images, and down here you see my board that we're meeting regularly to talk and to think through what it was that we were doing. They were providing the leadership and the guidance, the risk assessment, and really making sure that we're doing things for the right reasons in the right way, as I said previously. Here's some of the team that were out and about. Don in the office, John and Rowley. And we have a great team, and our team have been with us for years. And they know these people. And that was another really strong advantage for us, in that we really knew our people. We knew the vulnerable folks. We knew the folks with a disability. We knew how to relate to them, to communicate with them, to have a relationship with them. They trusted us. So here's just some of the messaging I've put up that we were developing, and I put out a video very early on, and as you can see, I had a terrible COVID haircut and took much abuse about that. But we were also still required to do essential travel. So we did cut it down to 5 people on the buses. So for people who are absolutely required to get, perhaps who are essential workers or whatever else. And I'm glad to say that over the 2.5 years, we never had one case of COVID, which I think was absolutely outstanding and testament to the team and the measures that we implemented. I am absolutely, truly grateful to them. But we were rigorous in our staff training and in our risk assessment. So there was a lot going into messaging, making it clear to people, a lot of working through the papers, through the council, through other agencies and organisations, and online. And in there's another lesson as well, thinking about how we work with the people. Community resilience is about community. And I think that's the thing that we can't lose focus. And it's about individuals within the community. This was some of the messaging that we've done that went into the papers about transport to the GP services. What were we doing? I've pretty much said it all. In some instances, we even helped families move who were in very vulnerable housing. We asked them to leave the house. We fogged the house. We moved beds. We moved babies' cots. We moved TVs. One individual was getting a renal, was dependent on a renal service for kidney dialysis. By and large, stood down. It's non-emergency patient transport service. So we stepped in there and we were taking people to out of area hospital appointments for cancer care, cancer treatment, cancer scans. And again, all of the other stuff I've already told you about. I'm not going to bore you senseless on that, so forgive me. Again, my board, indeed our accountant in as well. This was the AGM, and Sharon sitting in the background. Through
Hi, everyone. Seem to be having some connection issues with Jason. I will see if we can sort that. Thank you.
Sorry, am I going on too much as well, maybe here?
Hi, Jason. We're having some connection issues, but yeah, you might want to run through things just in case.
Okay. How are we doing for time, Andrew? Actually.
Well, again, if it was 10 to 15 minutes, then that would be a good time to wrap up.
No way it made a lot of sense for us to do what we were doing. We had knowledge, we had capability and logistics. We were flexible. We were able to change things very, very quickly. And with the support of the council and some of the elements within the trust, but particularly from Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, community development, community planning team, and some of the other voluntary and community organisations such as the Southwest Aging Partnership, we were able to affect change. And even the
all apologies for the loss in sound. Hopefully Jason will come back soon. Hello, Jason. Hi, Jason.
Yeah, can you hear me, Andrew?
Well, I can hear you again. Thank you.
Yeah, right. So look, very quickly, I'll shoot through here because it's really the last slides that are really most important. Internal inhibitors, the perceived and actual risk to staff and volunteers in terms of getting involved in being part of the initiative. We wanted to, of course we did, but a lot of our drivers and our volunteers had to shield We had lost a ball of income because our service had collapsed. So immediately we lost about £140,000. We didn't know about this virus. There was great uncertainty. We had some concerns around some of the people that were getting involved, some of the organizations, and their authenticity and commitment. So those were some of the internal inhibitors. Happy to talk about those more. Some of the external enablers was that the relative speed service could help out there. If you can do anything, do something. We know that people need to get food, prescriptions, medicines, and whatever else, and they allowed us to continue to do some aspects of the transport, and that was really powerful. Then that was followed up then with Fermanagh Noma District Council, community planning and community development, recognizing, look, we have a responsibility, we have skills and assets, things we can do, but we need other partners to help us in this, and we haven't. Development work that we have, and the long-standing relationships that we have with the likes of Helen and others. So there's existing communications, relationship and trust. But there still was, in my opinion, a lack of central government leadership and direction, which actually was rapidly in terms of the responses that were perhaps more appropriate locally than had they been entirely dictated from the top, and it's something I'll come back to. And there was also this unparalleled desire to volunteer, which was a strength, but it was also a weakness within the local community. And the furlough scheme helped us. It actually helped us look after staff that we didn't have to lose, and we could keep other members of staff on. External inhibitors and all of this, I still felt central government lag was slow. It was incredibly slow. And I think there was a lack of general preparedness. There was a lot of convening and talking, the usual co-creation, co-design, co-planning, which are all great and fancy terms. And I'm someone who's a background with some of the other folks on here. We have dealt in collaboration for over 25, 30 years. We have seen what works, we've seen what doesn't work, and I'm still amazed to this day that we're still talking about what it is. But there seemed to be a lack of general preparedness, a lack of understanding how government could work across. But again, silo mentality was huge. There was a lack of a shared language. It's easy to use words such as collaboration and co-production does not in and of themselves infer that there is collaboration or partnership working. And that was frustrating. I think for me, and it kind of its parallels in terms of positive mental health resilience. In any situation like this, it's interesting because you can start to see the development of what we might think of as ecosystems, as opposed to a community resilience ecosystem. I'm interested in this. I have absolutely no time for this. And I think what we could see is that some people were interested in building empires and profile through a crisis. And there's an old saying, never waste a good crisis. And this is where it needs to come back. We need to be focused on the community and on the ecosystem and the subsystems and what they bring to that, but on the people. But also, there was also an ongoing competitive versus collaborative tension. And a focus on individual human need. I think there's still a tendency to do what people always done, but trying to frame it within this new language, but there was still a very deep functional fixedness within the notion of working collaboratively and within wider systems. So those were some of the external inhibitors. Again, I think cognitive dissonance between some rhetoric and action. I heard, particularly at a regional level, people talking the talk, but not walking it. Their actions were not following up. There were tensions between top-down, so from regional and bottom-up thinking and proposed solutions. And again, the communication between, even within sectors, wasn't as good as it should have been, and the preparedness wasn't as good as it should have been. And again, to houses, and people say, but could you deliver to 1,600 houses, but we can't give you the names and address? Is that quite often, yes, but, and in situations like this in the community resilience, of systems interoperability. Now, all I mean by that is that one organization had a list of 4,000 people. We have
Hi, Jason, you've dropped off again.
I'm not sure what's going on here. So
hi, Jason, I can hear you again now. Yes, you dropped off. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I'll just keep firing through here. Forgive me, folks, for the speed. I apologize. Focus on real need. This is probably one of my big bugbears, was trying to be all things to all people and to appease certain political agendas. And I mean with a large P and a small p. I think one of the things that the pandemic showed was that there's a real danger of entitlement culture becoming huge, and that everybody needed something when not necessarily. I think we have to learn to prioritize and to really understand who needs what and what are the real needs. And some people, again, feeling that they need to be doing something, therefore they need to do something for somebody. But I think we need to step back from that, and we really need to think more cleverly and again within that systems approach. Then there was the parachuting in of some national organizations who apparently had collaborated and discussed with local collaborations, such as within Fermanagh and Omagh District Council and within the Western Health and Social Care.
Jason, you've dropped off again.
Right.
Yes, I can hear you now. I've turned off your video.
Right.
Yeah.
So also, I think a lack of central cross-departmental engagement, collaboration, that's a huge issue. The vaccination example I give you is a perfect example. I think the mental health example, where we were identifying people with mental health issues, it took 6 weeks for someone to follow up because all the mental health people were working from home and couldn't engage with or didn't have a phone to phone out, which to me was absolute and utter nonsense. Front-loaded response, there was a lot thrown at the response. It was as if everything had to go out at the beginning. So we were looking at the immediate road ahead without looking to the entire journey. And again, one of the other things was, I think, knowing your assets. We should have known our assets well and had them well mapped before this. Anyway, you know, we all work here. We should all know generally what's going on and going about. And I think amongst us in that early work, we had done that. We had conversations, and we were still trying to build that, and we're still trying to get to that stage. We have GIS, we have various mapping technologies now, but we were trying to catch up, which I think was unfortunate. And I think what we have learned from that, and we're getting better, and fair play to the council, there's been massive effort in terms of the mapping and monitoring, and we're working through the community planning process on that. I think there's been an over-reliance on online interventions, particularly for people within the collaboration and particularly by statutory organisations. They don't always work, and particularly in deeply rural or hyper-rural, whatever you want to call them, areas, because of lousy broadband, because of age, because of vulnerability, because of cost. And this other thing of communications, even amongst partners, quite often it's communications departments writing for communications departments rather than writing for partners in the collaboration or the partnership or the alliance. Certainly not for the people out in the community, so that they can understand and access and avail of the right support in the right way. So for instance, I'd have been a keen advocate of putting stuff in local papers and out through the usual channels, and listening to staff, people were still getting their papers. But yet there was this predominance of online, which for the vast majority of our people didn't work. and even to have used radio, which is big, which was largely ignored. Language and acronyms to, you know, Mary, who's sitting 26 miles out in the countryside, you know, a very simple life, very little income, perhaps on her own, 80 years of age. The language and acronyms need to go. You know, it's just someone in fancy ways. So key reflections, and sorry, I'm going to finish up now. In all of this, and still at the moment, you know, we've transitioned out of COVID, and you all know it was an up and down and up and down. It was like waves washing. There was periods again where we had to step back up into deliveries and back down again. We could free up the transport, and we were all working through one another. But one of the things is that I think being mindful when we're in this position, and I know that COVID is very specific. It was a very major, unprecedented event. But we need to give people hope and help. And we need to be careful that when we're doing our work, that we don't add to the collective community sense of catastrophe, the catastrophic thinking, and the sense of hopelessness and helplessness that was and is taking place within the community. Within Fermanagh, we have serious issues around mental health, self-harm and suicide. And I worry that a way a lot of organizations use and promote their services and try and get more money is by saying, look, we've delivered X amount, or we've given out and we've supported these people. This number of people are in food poverty and this, that, and the other. It's really bringing down, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy, it's Pygmalion concept, whatever you want to call it. And I worry about that. We need to be very, very careful in how we message and how we communicate and how we leverage and win future resources. I think the other thing is to listen and to manage the noise in the process. And this is coming back to this. I know that through the process of working with several partners, I would have got frustrated and seen that there was no value in actually working with these partners. And if it's not adding value, why am I doing it? Because the only reason we come together is to do something that we can only do together, that we can't do on our own. And I think that's an important thing for partnership, collaboration, coming together in terms of community resilience. Because there's a real danger in a whole lot of people wanting to be seen to be busy, that we're actually destroying value and undermining community resilience and working across one another at cross purposes. And again, I think another key reflection is move beyond cross-departmental rhetoric within Northern Ireland. We need to move to working collaboratively and across traditional silos at an executive level and at more regional and local levels. Genuine collaboration and partnership working rather than merely replacing it with new and fashionable terms. I'm probably as familiar with the language and the theory and the research on collaboration and research and partnership working as anyone. And I am fed up to the back teeth of seeing new terms coming out for what we should be doing and should already know. There's considerable work, again, from the likes of humanitarian relief and peace building and partnership working. But what we find is that within organizations, there is great and considerable functional fixedness. Talking the talk, but not prepared to walk. And then when you try and look for a change or an adaptation, but look, quietly, this is the way that we do things. We need people to be prepared to adapt and innovate as and when it's needed. People and organizations need a shared language and approach for working in partnership. It's not down to one organization or one individual. Everyone needs to share that language aside from the content or what it is, the issue that we're dealing with. And again, I think this is a constant and ongoing failure in terms of collaboration and partnership work. And I don't think we've any way realized the real value that we can achieve. But there needs to be investment in a real shared language and an approach, which facilitates and enables that shared process and content. And again, some of the folks that are on here know, and they will be familiar with the expression that depending on how you cook something will determine how good it tastes and whether or not people will want to come and eat from that dish and meet with you and share in that experience in the future. And again, partnership is no different. The other balance to that is that partnership isn't always necessarily the answer. Some people need to get on and do the job that they're supposed to do, whilst liaising with as well, because sometimes now we try and do everything through partnership. We need to see that there is a continuum of approach. Another big one is And I think this is one for the community and voluntary sector, which is a big one for us. The voluntary and community sector needs to be viewed and valued as real partners from the get-go, and not just seen as cheap and convenient add-ons when it suits. Community and voluntary sector proved that it was the sector that was able to deliver and adapt and get to the doorsteps. The statutory sector couldn't, by and large, in terms of mental health and those other issues, but we could. And there was much plaudits and applause given and credit given during that period. But now, after the event, we find ourselves fighting for the money to continue our services, to continue to be able to bring people through, hopefully normalizing their lives and helping them normalize their communities post-COVID. And the other thing is, I think, learning and empowerment. I've listened actually to a couple of the other talks in this series, and an awful lot of talk coming from organizations in the statutory sector and national and regional levels saying, well, you know, our job is to empower the community and voluntary sector, be empowered. Well, actually, my experience is that it's a multi-directional thing, in that the community and voluntary sector has as much to give by way of empowering and enabling, upskilling, advising, coaching and mentoring the statutory sector and semi-quasi-governmental organizations. I think it's very naive to think it's a top-down. It's a multi-directional 360. And we need to get away from the focus of community and voluntary sector being just project-driven. We need to be looking at services and systems redesign. And this point is a big one for me. I think we have a lot to learn, and I know it's something that you know we're doing. I think we need to do it better. I know in Fermanagh and Omagh we need to do it better. In Northern Ireland we need to do it better. I think across the United Kingdom we need to do it better. We need to really learn what worked well, but what didn't work so well, and what do we really need to learn and improve. I'm not aware of those conversations taking place, because otherwise we are destined to repeat them. And I think that any genuine evaluation, it can't just be the usual suspects who are going to pitch back in and give the narrative that paints the picture well and positive. If we're really about community resilience and the individuals, we need that evaluation to focus on them and from their needs and perspectives and the extent to which they were met. Again, the mapping and monitoring of assets, we should know our unique capabilities and strengths. Over-reliance, I've already talked about that. Communications, I've talked about that. Sorry, excuse me, I'm spitting here. I think the thing in all of this is that, to me, leadership is situational. I think ideally before COVID, it would have been great if we had the blessing of knowing that that COVID was coming. That said, we probably should have known, because there was pretty reasonable reason to assume that something of this nature was going to come along at some stage, and that our resilience infrastructure wasn't better, our preparedness, and particularly within a collaborative context. So I don't think there's one type of leadership. I think this notion of heroic leadership, set that aside, heroes and this carry on and whatever else. I think there should have been facilitative collaborative leadership in the preparation and build and understand and whatever else if we had the circumstances. Then when we get into the emergency, yes, and more command and control. And then as we come out of that, more democratic again. And again, other folks will be familiar with the idea that all approaches are right some of the time, but none of them are right all of the time. And I think one of the things that I seen was that in some situations, too many people were trying to be too facilitative in their approach, when people and organizations needed to be getting on and doing what they should have been doing. And someone in one of the talks used the notion of, you know, the development was very much based around serendipity. I'd rather be prepared. And I think fortune favors a prepared mind. And I'm nicking that quote from someone else. I think we need to be getting better at preparedness and working for community resilience at the local, at the sub-regional, at the regional and the national, international levels. You know, we've seen that. And I think, if anything, our experience at a microcosm level, I have no reason to believe doesn't mimic what happens at the micro level. And I know when talking to several academics that are researching this in Northern Ireland, they will say themselves that collaboration and partnership working left much to be desired. So it's just some of my final thoughts, folks. And again, some of you already know this. These are some of my mantras, and these mantras are stolen as well. And again, in the words of good old Walt Disney, 50% or more invented, not invented here. I think a partnership and in collaboration, and particularly in community resilience, there is no one of us as smart as all of us. And unfortunately, what we see is some organizations and some individuals coming in and thinking that they are. And what we're missing is vital assets and intelligence and abilities that are critical to empower and enable the community to affect the change, to take control, and to be active drivers and agents in the change that needs to happen at that local level. And we can't discount that. I've seen that with large-scale mining organizations. I've seen that with organizations in the health, major health departments that I've worked with in the past, and other government bodies. And this other thing is about, I think there was a real keenness to involve everybody in the response, but that created a really noisy, crowded space where people run about saying, well, what can I do? I need to do something. I'm volunteer. Why aren't I being thing? Again, this notion of maximum appropriate involvement. Our role wasn't about trying to place volunteers because someone wanted to be placed. Was there a need? We need to follow the need. And again, design and build shared collaborative pathways from where we are to where we want to get to. We need to plan our plans. We can't just jump into a plan. That's not collaborative. We need to think best about how we can be collaborative. And the planning of the plan needs to be collaborative. And again, the words of Fisher and Ury, you're better to know the entire landscape than to have one preferred pathway. And so I don't think there's any right answer, but again, I think there are better answers and solutions to how we collaborate and how we build community resilience at a local level. And again, I say, look, folks, these are entirely my personal observations, but I do think, and I fundamentally believe, that we need to move to a human-centered systems thinking approach to how we meet these needs in terms of community resilience. So I'll shut up there, and thanks for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. Yeah, really very interesting, very fulsome presentation. Apologies, obviously, for some of the drop off in sound, but at least with the slides on the screen, we were able to also then, make sure that we could all follow the points being made. Jason, if you don't mind, I'll keep your screen or your video off for the moment, okay, just in case we have any further issues. So at this point, obviously, we have a number of questions already within the chat function, but those that perhaps would prefer to raise a hand, please feel free to do so. And Jason, as we talked about actually just before we started the presentation, in terms of the technology and some of the perhaps digital poverty issues.
Yeah.
Obviously, Mark also picked up within the chat, in terms of certain issues around broadband and rurality. But apologies for that, and hopefully this Q&A we won't have similar issues. We have kind of a maximum of 20 minutes now. So as usual, in terms of the Q&As, we prefer if people are able to either come off screen or at least come off mute in terms of voicing the questions that you asked. So just going back to the very beginning in terms of the chat, obviously, Steve, you had a question in relation to particularly Fermanagh's border location and in terms of the services. So if you would perhaps like to ask that question, and then next will be Roisin, who actually has a question herself. So Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just from your initial slides where you were showing how much basically you protrude into the Republic of Ireland, did you encounter cross-border issues and treat people with COVID issues who might be, say, 200-300 meters the wrong side of the border? Did you attend to their needs, or did you treat them as a separate nation? Just wondering.
Steve, it's a good question and a great question, and a question that's becoming ever more pertinent. It wasn't within our gift or our resource to enter into the Republic to support those areas. Our focus was Fermanagh, at that time. And, you know, again, another thing that we would have to be very respectful of is that Cavan, Monaghan, Donegal and Leitrim, they all have their respective infrastructures and responses. Now, I do think that that is a fundamental weakness in that we have a back-to-back situation still in regard to what was an all-island pandemic, of course it was. And, you know, that there were larger political questions around that. And unfortunately, in the place that we live, those issues will persist and pervade. But there is no doubt the very question that you're asking, that for many of our people, I was saying to Andrew before we come onto the call, for instance, there's areas such as Rosslea and Balleek. The people that live in those areas, even though they live in the north, in Northern Ireland, in the United Kingdom, their natural hinterland takes them into the Republic of Ireland for their shopping and health needs. Now, if they needed to go to a GP appointment, we had the facility to be able to take them to a GP appointment. That was one dispensation that we had within that. So we were able to take people who needed. Now, unfortunately, we were asked to bring people who thought they were COVID positive for a test. We couldn't do that. We couldn't take that risk. But certainly we did help. But I think it's one of the big things that we really do need to look at in terms of the future, because for many people in the Republic, their natural service centres and points of service are in Northern Ireland. The border doesn't exist for them. So it is a real issue. And since Brexit, for instance, our vehicles are not allowed to drive into the Republic. We had our own account certificates revoked, and insurance is a big issue as well. So we had to make sure that whatever we done was covered through our insurance company, and that the risk assessment was presented to them as well. Now, we were lucky in that we actually were with Ensley, and Ensley were actually very, very facilitative and very accommodating. So we were allowed to drive in and out of the Republic. To drive in Fermanagh, it's very hard. For me to get from one point of Fermanagh to another, at some point, I'm probably going to have to drive into the Republic of Ireland, because the road will go in and go back out. So again, it's a part of the nature of the area. But we would, you know, I think we would have welcomed greater collaboration. I think everyone would. And I think it is a major issue. Thanks for the question, Steve.
No, thank you very much for the answer. It's just, I'm trying to picture that in a local context. I'm from Wales. I can see yes. my colleague Stefan is on from a different, the neighbouring county. And for us, sometimes you've got to drive through Steph's area to get to outlying parts of our area. And I just wondered whether you had to respect those boundaries. But thanks for the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Roisin? Yeah.
Hi, Jason. Thanks so much for your presentation. It was really informative. So I was just curious about the volunteers program, and specifically, I suppose, because predominantly the work is with vulnerable people, and whether FCT partner maybe with organisations that represent the needs of vulnerable people to provide that training, or essentially kind of how that works a little bit.
Yeah, no problem, Roisin. I suppose the organisations that existed before Fermanagh Community Transport have worked with, by and large, you know, our membership is 85–90% comprised of individuals with disabilities and or the elderly. We have that knowledge and that experience and that expertise. We have that internally, and through our Midas training, for instance, which a lot of community transport will do, we build that. We work and we engage regularly if we need particular training around a particular or emerging issue, such as Alzheimer's becoming increasingly more important, which is a big issue in our area. We'll bring people in. In terms of working and in terms of recruiting the volunteers, actually, when we advertise their services, volunteers come forward very quickly to offer their services to us, as did community groups, and say, look, Jason, can we as a community organisation perhaps take some of that stuff off you and deliver that out to our communities? Or can we sign up? Now, I do have to say, we did work very, very closely with Lynn in the local Volunteer Now agency, who also helped us and was tremendous at helping us actually recruit the volunteers, and again, through the platform that Volunteer Now has. But again, we went out through the press, we went out through the BBC, we went out through UTV. We have very good relationships with the media. But people know us, and people whose family members and loved ones that we were taking day in, day out on our service who found themselves furloughed were very, very keen to step up to do something. But what we were very mindful of, Roisin, was that we still wanted to make damn sure that these people, if you like, were fit for purpose, in that they were checked. So our access NI checked. They were going out to vulnerable people. Someone could have gone out under pretense to pretend to be helping, could have burgled, robbed, God forbid, whatever might have happened. So we were putting them through the process, and we were working with Volunteer Now, who, again, amazing, got those turned around very, very quickly. And we know there was a huge demand, and that was key. And by and large, we were relying on basic checks because people were going out in pairs. We demanded that people went out in twos, which got around the need for the enhanced check. But also we were mindful that we took on a volunteer cohort that we could manage. And what we were also trying to do was to educate the other members of the partnership. Look, folks, this thing is spread through contact, through travel, through engagement. People are running about thinking they're doing a great thing. And it's great that people want to step up and do something. But we don't know where they have been to where they're going and how they may be spreading this amongst the most vulnerable. We need a strategy in terms of how we lead and coordinate that. And we were very mindful of that the whole way through. And I think one of the interesting things, Roisin, so yes, we did work with other organizations, but we had a lot of that knowledge in-house. Volunteer Now was essential in terms of the vetting and everything else, absolutely. One of the interesting things through COVID was the emergence and the evolving of the lone volunteer who operated in isolation, which is an amazing thing, but that isn't in response to people who don't want to get involved in community groups. They don't want the bureaucracy, they don't want the hassle because of having to comply with charitable law and insurance and everything else. What we're finding here in Northern Ireland and within our local communities, a lot of people are being put off civic involvement because of the bureaucracy. And what you're having is a lot of informal groups coming together and lone volunteers. So there's a challenge there in how we, how do we involve, how do we honor, and how do we value that as well in all of this? But making sure that they're safe and the people that they're serving is safe. So there was something coming out there as well in that. So I think we were very comfortable working with the client groups that we were working with, and we were working very closely with the health authorities. And in fact, I even ended up advising one of the largest community transport operators in England on how to respond to COVID in using their vehicles. And they have 10,000, 20,000 members. We have 1,000. So we were helping to share our practice as well, and in terms of volunteers. So hopefully that's something, Roisin. I'm not sure entirely if it's answered your question, but
no, great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. We have lots of really positive comments in the chat function, and just in the interest of time, there a question from Salafa. If I just read it out, and then I see two hands up. It's basically Salafa's asking, have you any examples in terms of good practice around the 360 way of working and that sort of resourcing from both sides in terms of that kind of debriefing process?
Yes, I have, and there are other people on this particular webinar that Sean O'Boyle is on, a good friend of mine from many years ago, when Sean and I have both worked in some of the most contested spaces in Northern Ireland, where because of paramilitarism, it was life and death, communities were being crippled and destroyed. We have a very large body of experience and methods that can be used, and those are continually evolving. I think now, as we're looking at human learning systems, systems thinking, and Sean and I, as well as having worked with and been associate trainers and master trainers for the Interaction Institute for Social Change, those methods are there. We have those methods. I can't explicate it here. There will be a webinar in itself. In fact, there would be a course in that, but it can be done. But the problem is people have not wanted to. People want to measure what they feel they can comfortably measure without any anything that makes it not look as good. But we need to take the good, and I'm not interested in what's good and what doesn't work. I'm interested in what works and what can we do better or what can we improve. And again, I think a very real notion, and some of the other folks will be aware of, in this, we share the pain and we share the gain when we work together. It's not about we hold one another to account in the partnership. We're in as equals. And the evaluation in that it's not that complicated, but I see it being constantly complicated. Someone will commission an external large consultancy house to come in and do an evaluation, and they will do their standard conventional approach to evaluation. The evaluation itself needs to be embedded in sound, solid partnership success indicators and measures, and the processes need to reflect that. And there are resources out there that can do that. We have used them in the past within particular contexts. We've worked with many partnerships, and Sean will have done the same, where we have done reviews and evaluations, and within health trusts around particular programs where we've done it, or perhaps more importantly, where they've been stuck, where collaboration has broken down, and we've gone in to try and understand what's not working, what's holding them back, what's the blockage, and helping them move beyond that. If that answers that question. But I'm very happy to talk to anyone outside of the webinar if they want to get in touch. I'm very happy.
That's great. Thank you.
Right?
We had Chris, did you have your hand up? I think it's down now, but maybe the question you had might have been answered just now. Maybe Chris is gone. Denise, you've got your hands up. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, just a comment. I'm from Volunteer Now, and I just wanted to say thanks very much for the positive feedback. That's always lovely to hear. I suppose from our point of view, in terms of managing the Access NI thing through the initial part of the pandemic, we were supported by Access NI streamlining some of their processes and just making things a wee bit quicker and easier, and that was really helpful. And I suppose it would be lovely to see some of that kind of, I think picking up on Jason's point, some of those longer term changes. We don't have, for example, portability for Access NI checks in Northern Ireland, and that would be something that would be really valuable to groups so that they don't have to keep going back and checking people again. And the second thing I just wanted to mention was, and again, I thought Jason made a really good point about, we were looking at the first bend in the road rather than looking at the long-term journey, because the issue around volunteering, the spontaneous volunteers, the people who just come forward, as Jason's described, those people could have been really usefully engaged over the period of the 2 or 3 years of what, where we are now. But actually at the beginning, there was absolutely no system there, and there still isn't. And that's not just a Northern Ireland thing, because I'm working with colleagues in the rest of the UK and across Ireland as well. And I know that everybody was in that same boat. And I think that that's something that we really need to give attention to, as to how usefully to engage people at those very early stages and to keep them in for that longer haul, because you will need them, but initially you're just overwhelmed. So it was just to make a comment really, and to say thank you, Jason, for a fab presentation.
Thank you, Denise. Very kind of you. Thank you. And thank your organisation as well.
Well, thank you very much. As I said, Jason, there's a lot of really positive sort of comments and observations within the chat, as well as obviously the questions that have been fielded. Obviously, we'll be able to capture those comments in terms of the recording, so we can obviously pass some of those on to you. Sort of congratulations for your presentation, in spite of some of the issues that we've had over kind of rural broadband.
Yeah.
And we're just 5 minutes before our scheduled finish, but I think it's been a really tremendous presentation, and thanks for everyone who have attended, and thanks obviously to you, Jason, for giving up of your time and really sharing your insights of what you and your organization did during COVID. It was bringing back a lot of memories that those of us such as Roisin and others, obviously we've worked on this basically since March 2020.
Yeah.
So it was also bringing back a lot of memories and reflection points. So thank you very much. The recording, as I mentioned at the beginning, will be available through the YouTube channel, and obviously we hope to see all of you and more at the next webinar in February, details of which and the calendar invite for which will be sent out next week. So thank you very much, and thank you to Jason.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Roisin. Thanks a million. Thanks for letting me be part of it. Cheers. Really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.